Good day, everyone, and welcome to our W.Media podcast. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be discussing the slightly cryptic subject of decoding the SIJORI. For those of you who maybe are not living in the region, SIJORI refers to the geographic area to the north of Singapore, the Johor area of Malaysia, and to the island immediately to the south of Singapore, the Riau Islands. And their coordination as an area actually started some time ago in 1994, at the end of 1994, where a memorandum of understanding was signed between the three countries in order to expand the economic and social ties between the three areas. It is referred to as the SIJORI Growth Triangle, and it will be interesting to see today as to whether the larger economic and social factors on which it was founded have actually turned it into a data center factor here. Singapore accounts probably for 75 to 80% of the GDP of the region. It has about 10 million inhabitants and covers about 7,000 square kilometers. So that's probably enough background from me. Can I get on to introduce our speakers? We have James Murphy, Managing Director of the Asia Pacific at DC Byte. And we welcome also Wong, Board Member at DCIX JBIX in Malaysia, as well as being Group Managing Director of Extreme Broadband and Managing Director of OpenDC. So welcome to you both.
Thank you, Nick. Great to be on today.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. Would you like to start with James? Just please tell me, in terms of the subtopic we're looking at, which is called Decoding SIJORI, SIJORI, what do you feel is the importance of this topic, particularly for listeners who may be in that area of Southeast Asia?
Well, it's certainly in a data center perspective, it's becoming increasingly relevant because, and this is sure one of the topics we're going to get to, in the previous, I suppose, decade or even preceding that, Singapore has always been the hub, the default location for, I want to say for most investments, certainly for data center investments. So when people think of the requirement for any sort of data center deployment, Singapore is generally the first place that comes to mind, especially for those people who are looking at it from Europe or the US or even somewhere like Australia. So Singapore has been the default, but for a variety of reasons, that's no longer really the case. So people are having to start looking at having to look at other options, and that's where I think Johor Bahru and Batam come into play, because for a variety of reasons, Singapore is just a very difficult place to either build a data center or actually find data center space in right now. So that's kind of seen the emergence of both Johor and Batam as kind of viable options to this. And these are two markets which, well, one is already experiencing explosive growth and the other one is trying to prime itself for that. So I think that's the kind of the background and why it's becoming increasingly relevant, especially from a data center perspective.
Okay, James, that's terrific. Thank you very, very much for that. And Weng, please, would you tell us your opinion on, why this consideration of this three-country region, if you like, is an important issue to look at?
I think the trigger point of this of the whole SIJORI story is actually started sometime back in 2019 when the moratorium for new DC build was introduced in Singapore. So during that time, there's a lot of demands in DC space that were trying to find a new location to fulfill the power requirement need. And as a result of the moratorium, people are looking at the neighboring regions. So Johor naturally became one of the options people are looking at. And likewise, due to the promotions from the Singapore government, Batam is also became an option that people look into. Now the three locations, why they were picked essentially is due to proximity to the to the regional hub of Singapore. The physical requirement for data to transfer to the hub is still a very important consideration, because whatever content that is hosted in the data centers, they require to have a low latency connectivity to these destinations. So naturally, everybody is looking at the location which can provide the power that is closest to Singapore, and both Batam and Johor are considered those options. Now today, I think as a result of that, we can see the explosions in the new data center built in Johor, which is among one of the fastest in the history of the world, in terms of new DC build, and in terms of the capacity introducing into the market. I think Johor has pretty much set a record, and we haven't seen it is reaching the peak yet. I think we are only seeing the beginning of this phenomenon in DC constructions in the southern Malaysia. So given the big investments people the DC players put into Johor, I think the southern region of Malaysia will no choice but become one of the very top consideration for many location players who are looking for a location to host their content in this region. So in terms of the sheer volumes, the supply capacities, and essentially it will be the pricing as well. So Johor will be something interesting for everybody to look into. Yeah.
Weng, thank you very, very much. And just to build on something that you said there, you mentioned the moratorium in Singapore, and obviously the suggestion is that it's still an area that the government in Singapore is looking very closely at in terms of new data center builds. With the if you like, the sustainability environmental criteria that can be set on that. What do you feel is the message that Singapore is sending out to the investors, some of whom, as James mentioned, come from a long way away in Europe, North America, keen interest in both those areas of the world, in what is happening in Southeast Asia? What message is Singapore currently, do you believe, sending out in terms of developing data centers, investing in data centers in the country?
Obviously, it is sending a strong message to the DC player that they are the country needs a better source of energy in order to power the DC expansions. And I think from the previous permit that they have given to the DC players to construct, we can see the trend towards a more responsible or energy production strategy, which is something that I think they are setting an example for many of the neighboring countries to eventually follow. I actually do applaud the Singapore government's their determination and their guts in doing this. But looking at it, I think we can see that ultimately many of the neighboring countries that do not see immediate needs to do it, but many of them are already changing their energy production strategies in order to align to this trend that the Singapore government is setting. So that's for the data center side. On the connectivity side, I think last year the Singapore government has, I think they have came out with a master plan to continue to build additional to attract additional submarine cable to land into Singapore. So Singapore as a connectivity hub, I think the government is still are very, very keen to continue to pursue that advantages. So which is something that I think will continue. So Singapore will still be a very interesting traffic hub. Although in terms of the data center hub, there may be other options. But Singapore, I can foresee that will remain to be a very interesting connectivity hub in the many years coming.
Okay. So, I mean, what we're saying is that, you could say Singapore is not, if you like, declining in its influence. It's actually transforming itself in order to maintain its position. It's not if you like, a seismic shift. It's just a transformation that's undergoing. Interesting. James, yes, I'd ask you, because there is another factor in this that I've been, earlier this month, the government looked at introducing the Digital Infrastructure Act. How do you think this will, reduce disruption to internet services that happen as a result of data center outages? Again, how do you think that it might impact the investment traffic that goes into Singapore in terms of data centers?
Thanks, Nick. That's an interesting one, because I think there's several issues at play here. Obviously, a number of months ago, there was another very high-profile internet outage, which affected some of the I suppose the flagship banks in Singapore. So I think everyone is keen to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But these kind of outages they happen all over the world. So I think everyone wants to make sure that the fail-safes are in place to ensure it doesn't happen. But the reality is, from time to time, we're going to see these. We've seen them in Australia recently. We've seen them in Japan. We see them in Europe. We see them in the States. So I think having robust internet or digital infrastructure as a whole is very important. I don't necessarily think that would influence the flow of capital in Singapore, be that on the subsea cable side of things, or be that on the data center infrastructure side of things. I think everything being equal, and without a moratorium or without the kind of the regulations that are in place, I think Singapore would more than likely continue to be the default location for data center developments. As Weng mentioned, the connectivity is kind of world class, with multiple subsea cables landing in Singapore and a robust ecosystem of connectivity. The whole kind of major international telco and connectivity players having POPs and things like that in Singapore. So I think that's kind of two slightly different issues. But I think, again, the Singapore government is being very proactive and showing that they do take these kinds of incidences seriously. Like I said, I think they do happen, and you can have all the fail safes in the world in place. Sometimes these things will still happen, but it does give those people who are investing in the whole ecosystem of digital infrastructure, it shows them, these kind of moves show them that the government is taking this seriously and wants to minimize these kind of disruptions. So I think it's just another sign that they do place value, despite the moratorium being in place, on having this kind of investment in country and this kind of continued investment from, like I said, all the different players who are involved in digital infrastructure.
Okay, could I put another factor in? We've talked kind of like about what the situation in Singapore as being as the driver for the region immediately around it. But if you look at the region immediately around it, Indonesia and Malaysia principally, then they have emerged in every sense as data center locations. And they become locations more of choice than they used to be. Would you suggest that if there is this continuing growth and maturing of the industries in the nations around Singapore, that this would put Singapore's throne as a data center hub under threat?
I don't believe so. Sorry, Weng. I don't believe so. I think you have to look at the workloads which are being housed in Singapore and Johor to date, because I think Johor so far has seen more deployments. A lot of the critical stuff, a lot of the connectivity elements are still being housed in Singapore for, let's call it, regional traffic. Whereas Johor, we're seeing some of these, I think we're seeing more hyperscale deployments, which may not be so latency sensitive or may not have the same connectivity requirements that an international bank may have or something like that. So it's different use cases. And I think what we're going to see is, I think we're going to see the three different areas offering different things. So right now we're seeing Johor is taking a huge amount of capacity from ByteDance. I think it's widely enough known that that's the main client driving all of the demand in there. And so their requirements are not the same as, like I said, an international bank or someone who requires very low latency. So the different markets are going to specialize in different elements, I think. And I don't see a situation where an international bank or insurance company or something like that houses their core compute in Johor, for example, because it's not going to have the same connectivity. It's not going to have the same latency that a downtown site in somewhere like Tai Seng in Singapore might have. So I think Johor, I think, is actually fast on track to overtaking Singapore in terms of the overall number of megawatts in the country. But that's not to say that its importance from a connectivity point of view or from as a center of data centers or internet traffic or digital infrastructure, they're two different things. So I think there'll be different use cases for the three different markets that we're talking about, and each will be able to find its own niche. It's not a zero-sum game. Like, there can be a successful Johor market, a successful Singapore, and successful Batam market, all working and in fact complementing each other. So that's kind of the view, my personal view, and also the view we have at DC Byte. Like, we think that all markets can grow and complement each other and provide value to each other.
Okay, James, thank you. Weng, your thoughts here, please. The idea that Singapore as the prime data center hub, is that under threat? Do you believe?
I'm actually in agreement with James in this. I think the last count, in my last count, Singapore has about 26 submarine cable landing in the shore.
Yes.
And then the number of networks, the last I checked, Singapore has more than 700 networks peering with one another. Versus Malaysia, we probably have about 300 networks max. So, in terms of the density of its connectivities, fabric, Singapore is it's by far the best in the region, and this is not something that can be developed overnight. Unlike power capacity, you can get it. If the country has excess power capacity, that you can just tap onto its power capacity to build easy. It takes years to build connectivities, and it takes even longer to build an ecosystem of these networks that is riding on the connectivities. So, and this is not easy to replicate at all. And if it's at all possible, it would take long time to replicate. Now, having said that, but they are actually threats for the Singapore throne at the horizon. And this is something that I think the industry, or if I'm just being blunt, then I would say the industry moderator should pay attention to, which is the ease of connectivity between Malaysia and Singapore. So for us to build these complementary regions between each others, helping the industry to leverage on the strength of each regions to build a very resilient and very high capacity data centers regions in the world. We're talking about something that can, we need a policy that is transparent and easy for people to interconnect between the two regions. And as of today, I wouldn't say that we have the necessary policy and or rather the transparency in place, that all the players, be it the DC players or connectivity players, can interconnect with each others. So this is actually something that I think both countries, we have to sit together to iron out some of these bottlenecks. If not, then the potential is which each countries will just go away and develop its own connectivities in isolation to each others. Then this is not something that will benefit the industry as a whole. So I think this is something that I'm watching quite closely right now.
Okay, that's interesting, because it seems like the overall framework is in place for this kind of particular coordination, if you like, or partnership between Singapore, between Batam and Johor. Is that's all very much in place, but the actual people in terms of our industry who are needed to make it happen are not haven't quite come to the table yet. Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, it's more so than that. I'm actually talking about the regulatory regime between the two countries. So we need to have a very transparent and well documented policy for the players in both sides to for example. So those policies is very important for the two regions to collaborate and to leverage on each other's strength to grow together.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, can we move on now to Malaysia? Now, as you mentioned, Weng, and the rate of growth in recent years in Malaysia has been some of the fastest observed in the history of the data center industry. And James obviously is the man with a lot of statistics at his fingertips, and I don't know whether he can confirm this for us. But can I ask, in terms of Malaysia, is it just about what happens in Singapore, that there was a moratorium and therefore some demand, and James made the point, not all demand, but some demand has moved north to the southernmost regions of the Malay Peninsula? I suppose the question behind this is Malaysia seen as an attractive data center location? Does it still need to prove that again to the data center and to the investment communities? And if Malaysia did have to build its business case, if you like, what would be the basis of that? I'll throw this to Weng or James, whoever would care to answer that.
James, would you like to take that first?
Yeah, sure. So Nick, I think in looking at what's happening in Malaysia, I think it's quite important to make distinction between what's happening in KL and I suppose SIJORI specifically, and then in Johor. So Malaysia is a relatively immature market still, I would say. It's only really now that the hyperscale clouds are setting up cloud regions and availability zones, which is going to serve Malaysian business generally. So we've seen announcements from Microsoft and AWS, and in fact Google now in the last couple of years, and they're at various stages of setting up their AZs to service Malaysia cloud region. So that's a relatively new development, and that's driving a lot of the growth that we're seeing in KL. Then in Johor is a kind of a different business case, because I think what we're seeing in Johor is facilities which are not going to cater to Malaysian demand specifically, but I think more regional demand. So the big deployments being made by Byte through a number of different operators, for example, that's not to cater to Malaysian traffic or Malaysian demand. That's regional demand. Likewise, the SEA group, they've got a big deployment with YTL up in Johor as well. That's not just purely for Malaysian traffic, that's regional traffic. So Johor has managed to present itself as a very strong alternative to Singapore for regional traffic and regional applications. Singapore is essentially kind of said it's closed for business for the moment while it figures things out with the moratorium and testing to see how things go after this first pilot phase. And in the meantime, Johor has kind of proven that you can build there very quickly. Land prices are pretty cheap, especially in comparison to Singapore. The government is very welcoming. There's tax incentives. Working with the utilities providers is not without some pain, but I think generally a fairly easy process as well. So Malaysia has shown, and Johor in particular has shown the international operators, the finance behind these projects, that if you commit to Johor, you can get a facility off the ground, get it built 12, 18 months. It's going to be a lot easier to build in Johor than Malaysia because there's not the same kind of land constraints that there are in Singapore. You can build 1 or 2 story facilities as opposed to having to build up, as is the case in Singapore, which presents engineering challenges and which then impacts PUE and things like that. So I think Malaysia has said, and MDEC has obviously been around for a long time. It's been open for business for data center development for quite a while. And I think through a combination of circumstance with the Singapore moratorium and also the changing demands of data centers and data center deployments. So it's not something that's just happened in the last couple of years. A lot of groundwork has gone into the success and the development that's now being seen both in KL and Johor. But I think it is important to really highlight that it's what's happening in KL is primarily for Malaysian domestic demand, whereas Johor, as of right now, is really a regional play.
Okay, so there are different markets, obviously, within Malaysia that appealing to different markets. It's a diversified market. It's not a kind of single unitary style market. Weng, could I just have your opinion here? Do you agree with James? What's your view in terms of does Malaysia still need to prove itself as a data center location, and how would it do so?
Yeah, I think in general, I do agree with James. In that the central regions typically the workload was hosted to meet the domestic requirement, whereas Johor is meant for regional requirement. But I do see that there were hints of changes from one customer to another. I have seen recently, because of the readiness of the DC, some of the workload as destined for regional distributions were hosted in the central region as well. So I think this landscape may change over time, depending on when is the requirement and what is the readiness of the DC in meeting the power requirements. So this is kind of a fluid development. So we will see more in times to come. Now, to address your questions on whether Malaysia we still need to prove that it's an attractive data center locations. Like what James mentioned just now, we have an agency that is set up to promote the ICT development. The MDEC, they have done a very good job, and they have been consistently helping investors to come into Malaysia. I think this is something I believe has helped Malaysia to come to where it is today. However, we also share a little bit of uncertainties in policy. For example, the case of the cabotage. When we the way we deal with submarine operators in their subsea investments, our policy have flip-flopped before, so we do have that track record too. So I wouldn't say it's it's a done deal that Malaysia is going to be the de facto locations for new build. But I think Malaysia still need to work hard in terms of proving to the world, in terms of the consistency of its policy, the more matured policy on its vital infrastructures, and what is our long-term ESG policy. I think these are all the policies that we have to continue to develop, and in order to meet a world-class standard.
Understood. Okay, thank you. And perhaps a quick question to both of you. The issue of currency, the ringgit is currently traveling in a very low direction. Has this impacted companies coming in to build data centers in Malaysia, in Johor particularly?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, I just wondered if the depreciation of the ringgit had any negative.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, on the construction of data centers in Malaysia.
Not at all, because the depreciation of ringgit is a good thing for foreign investors who are mostly transact in US dollars, if not Singapore dollar. So I think it's a good news to many of the FDI that Malaysian ringgit is getting cheaper.
Okay, James, any thoughts on just that particular kind of subject?
Yeah, I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference. Like there's pros and cons, obviously, to the ringgit deflating for people who are pouring money in. Obviously, they can buy more, like land, things like that become cheaper. There is the issue on the flip side when they're ordering some of the expensive materials from overseas. It becomes more expensive. They have to use ringgit to bring it in, but it generally doesn't make too much difference. I wouldn't say it moves the needle too much. Like I think money is still going to be pouring in, and just the sheer economics of some of these 100 megawatt style developments just mean that a significant change in the ringgit, I should say. It doesn't impact their grander plans too much, I don't believe.
Okay. And just one final question on Malaysia, or Johor in particular, before we move to Batam. Earlier this year, it was announced that Johor and Singapore will establish a special economic zone within Malaysia's Johor Iskandar region. Who do you think is going to benefit most from that? North of that border or south of that border? James, maybe start us on this one.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting, Nick, because that announcement, it's not a data center specific thing. I think it's going to impact a lot of different industries as well. But I think we need to look at this as it being not a zero sum game. I think both north and south of the causeway will benefit from some of the policies being put in place. Like I said, they were quite light on data center specific ones. I still think they're still trying to work it out in terms of how the data is handled and things like that. So it was, like I said, pretty vague from a DC point of view. But as Weng and I mentioned earlier, I think we need to look at the two markets, or three if you're to include Batam in this, as markets with complementary offerings, and it's kind of a case of all of them can rise in unison, rather than this being detrimental to Singapore's data center industry or detrimental to Johor's data center industry. So I just think it's going to make things easier, like the movement of capital, the movement of people, the movement of goods and services, which benefit the DC industry. So like I said, it's a bit light on detail at the moment from a DC perspective, but I think generally it's been welcomed by the key stakeholders on both sides of the border, and it's something I think the industry as a whole is looking forward to learning a bit more about, because I think generally people are quite optimistic about what it may involve.
Well, Weng, please, your thoughts.
Yeah. I think definitely I'm looking forward to that, because an example, I think we have seen Singapore players coming up to set up DC in Johor. I think they will certainly be facing the questions from their customers who would like to transfer asset between the two data centers. So having these special economic zones will help to facilitate this kind of transfer of asset, because hopefully with the removal of the tax between the regions, the asset will be easier to be transferred between the two countries. So that will definitely help the industry to grow both regions together. And as a whole, if both Singapore and Johor are considered a regions, we remove all these tax burden between to transfer asset between the two regions. Definitely, it will encourage more global players to come in and use these regions as their regional hub. So I definitely look forward to seeing this happen.
Okay, Weng, thank you. Moving now to moving south to Batam. And this is almost a kind of comparison exercise to start with. James mentioned the different types of organizations, the different types of workloads going to Singapore, going to Johor. If you then put Batam into this equation, how does it compare to what, James, you were saying in terms of the workloads going into these different places, or indeed the different sorts of organizations that will head to Batam rather than Singapore or rather than Johor?
So what's the question, Nick?
Really, I'm interested as to where Batam fits into this sort of little dynamic region that's referred to as SIJORI. How is it different in terms of its appeal, in terms of its draw from Singapore and from Johor? Before, you mentioned different types of organization, different types of workload going to Singapore versus going to Johor. And I wondered if you could perhaps do the same comparison for us in terms of Batam. Where does it fit into what's available in SIJORI?
Okay, well, I think if you look at Johor, that has been very successful in appealing to hyperscale style clients who require a huge amount of capacity, which can serve a region. So I think as of right now, I think that's Johor's niche. And maybe 10 years ago, maybe that they kind of accidentally arrived upon that situation, but that's what we've seen in the last, let's say, 2 years, and that's where demand seems to be coming from those style deployments. Batam, as of yet, I think it's probably safe to say, without upsetting too many people, hasn't quite found its niche. So Batam is obviously very close to Singapore, about 40 minutes by ferry. It's got, I want to say 9 or maybe 10 subsea cables right off the coast of Nongsa Digital Park, for example. So there's a lot of connectivity there. We talk to people all the time. Some people say it's going to be a kind of a stop for traffic flowing between Singapore and Indonesia. And I think at this point it's worth highlighting that even though Jakarta has been a hot market for 2-3 years now, in terms of the actual deployed IT loads down there, it's still quite small. Certainly for a country with 270 odd million people and with the vast economic potential that holds. So some people are mentioning it might be that sort of play. I think a number of other people have said that it could actually be more suited to kind of retail / wholesale overspill from Singapore. I think in part due to that connectivity, all those subsea cables which are right off the coast and obviously plug straight into some of the key data centers in Singapore as well. So if they're able to, I suppose, provide clarity and reassurances around the data protection piece, which I think has still got people slightly nervous, I think then people will say, okay, well, if we can't deploy workloads in Singapore, Batam is fine, because the latency and the fact that there's all the supporting infrastructure is there means that it will be as if it's in Singapore anyway. So we won't have any constraints or won't have any sort of performance issues there. So, like I said, I think Batam hasn't yet found its niche or it hasn't found it certainly in the same way that Johor may have done. But I think at this point, it's also worth pointing out that MDEC was promoting Johor as a data center location for probably close to 10 years before we saw this boom, which only really kicked off about 2 or so years ago. So there's plenty of time. It's got a lot of the raw ingredients in place, the subsea cables, things like that, the access to power, land, which are requirements for a data center hub. So I think it will find its place, but giving you the perfect answer to that right now is very, very difficult to do.
Yes, there are a number of uncertain factors in play, obviously. Weng, please, can I bring you in, your thoughts on, what's your view of Batam, as a destination for data centers? Do you see it, for example, as, inverted commas, competitive to Johor and Malaysia?
Sure, Nick. I want to say, based on the little knowledge I have on the Batam, I think the one of the attractive proposition for Batam I can think of is the number of subsea cable terminating onto Batam versus the fact that Batam is in Indonesia. So I think I would imagine data center operator will deploy in Batam in additional to as an expansion from Singapore. They will also be looking at using Batam to address the Indonesian market. So now for that purpose, I have also recently seen that in Indonesia itself, there are other regions that have developed much faster than Batam. So in a way, it's actually lagging behind in terms of the ecosystem building. When you have more players coming into one area, one region collectively, then it will tend to create the ecosystems that will attract more players to come. So in that respect, I think Batam has lost its quite a bit of a pace compared to the other regions in Indonesia. And then also, other than that, I think in terms of the connectivity, no doubt, there are many interesting subsea cable terminating into the Batam. But how can Batam capitalize on that in order to create an interesting ecosystems? I think that is also another question that I would ask in terms of from the connectivity perspective, because if they are just doing transparent pass-through, then that's not necessarily creating value for Batam, for people to be to come in there to put a content. So in summary, I think Batam itself will have to carefully consider what is its value propositions. Not only from the DC perspective, but especially from the connectivity perspective. How can it add value in the creation of this ecosystem, of this connectivity ecosystems? First of all, you have to make sure there is a location where people can hear, networks, IP networks can interconnect with one another within the island itself. So these are all part of the components that can create a very interesting ecosystems. And I think Batam still doesn't have one yet.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Wong, and thank you, James, for your response. I mean, would it be possible, and I picked this up from what both of you have been saying, that, we're saying, well, you're south of Singapore, therefore, are you looking north of Singapore? But in reality, Indonesia, in a lot of industries, including data centers, is going to be one of the major growth markets in terms of quantum of happen in the world. And therefore, if I were in Batam and I was thinking about data centers, I may be looking south to Jakarta rather than north to Singapore. Just that's my interested in your thoughts on that, James.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment to make. I wouldn't necessarily say just looking south to Jakarta, because I think, like I said, Batam could carve itself out as where the traffic flows through via boat. So I think one of its offering could be its geographical location. Like that's why, well, one of the reasons why Singapore was for years sort of as the default location for Southeast Asia, because it was kind of in the center of everything.
Yes,
everything in Asia, including India. Like a lot of people, especially from outside the region, may not realize this, but until very recently, a lot of Indian workloads would have been housed in Singapore because of its relative proximity to India. So I think you could make the same kind of case for Batam, but I think like Indonesia's economy has got so much potential. Like I said, it's the Jakarta data center market is still pretty immature, certainly if you compare it to a Singapore or a market like that. So I think Batam will benefit, and you're right. I think maybe it should be looking to complement what's happening in Jakarta rather than trying to position itself as a alternative to Johor, because from what we've seen and what we're hearing, those hyperscale regional deployments are going to Johor, and the more of these that go there, assuming that power constraints don't become an issue, I think it's almost a snowballing effect. Well, they will just continue to go there because the infrastructure will be there, the human capital will be there to build and operate these facilities, which then will make it very difficult for Batam to compete with. So I think, yeah, like I said, it should be looking south is probably a sensible strategy, or just figuring out how it makes the most of its position in between Singapore and Jakarta.
Okay, that's interesting. Just before we leave the topic of Batam, could I ask you both just maybe one thing that you would recommend that, that if you were responsible for data centers coming into Batam, attracting investment, whatever, what would be the one thing that you would do to help them move forward? Weng.
Okay. Happy to take that. I think I would suggest to start with an internet exchange in Batam, a neutral, reputable internet exchange. Yes, that can help to amalgamate everybody together, to at least to localize the connectivity within the islands. I think that will be one of the lowest cost, value creation for Batam as a DC hub. And then the other thing, I think the government also should have a standard policy for the constructions of fibers and the utilities. So they need to demonstrate to the world that not completely mirroring Singapore's world-class quality, but at the minimum, it should have some policies in place to ensure that the safety of the cable, safety of the utilities are being monitored and is being policed. So I think those are some of the measures I think can be put in place to enhance the confidence of investors.
Okay, James, please, the recommendations that you would make, please.
I'm not so sure I would necessarily have recommendations, because I think the people responsible for the developments and Marco at Nongsa Digital Park and these kind of people, I think they actually are making good progress. I think 5 years ago, people would have had a lot of reservations about even thinking about that. But they've created policies, they've lobbied the government, they've created the special economic zone there. So I think they are actually doing a lot of the right things. So my advice would be keep doing more of the same and increase the transparency of what's going on down there. Because again, I think sometimes people will be slightly dubious of Indonesia in general, certainly when comparing it to the ease of which you could do things in Singapore. But I think they are actually in the process of alleviating a lot of those concerns. I think what people will be keen to see is they'll be keen to see successful projects which have been built. Obviously, quite a lot of things have been announced there. And there is some construction going on there at the moment. But I think once you see a couple of facilities successfully being sold as well in terms of the actual capacity within these facilities, I think that will give people confidence, because there's still some practical concerns around Batam. And depending who you ask, some people will say, okay, well, it may only be 40 minutes away on a ferry, but 40-minute drive is easier than a 40-minute ferry. Obviously, you could be victim to weather and things like that. So I think, like I said, I think their policy and I think the decisions they're making are the correct ones and the right ones. I think there just needs to be a bit of patience, because as I've kind of touched upon a few times, it took the, I suppose, the powers that be in Johor a long time to convince people that Johor was actually a viable alternative and actually a suitable place to develop DCs. Like MDEC is not a new organization. They've been lobbying for development in Johor for quite a while. So, like I said, I think they're on the right track. I just think they need to stick at it and just provide the reassurances that people need to see, because obviously when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, people want as little risk as is possible for any sort of project. So just alleviating these risks and ensuring that it's a safe environment so that people don't get burnt and can actually operate the facilities down there.
Okay, James, Weng, thank you very, very much for your answers to that question. Just one final question before we wrap up this section of this broadcast. And it's probably a difficult question to answer, but interesting nevertheless. If we were to move forward 5-10 years, how do you think, what would be the most major changes that you would expect in the dynamic between these three markets? Obviously, we're seeing Singapore at the center, Johor as an area of another country, Malaysia, to its north, and a number of islands, part of Indonesia, to its south. And, you've both given excellent, concise, and interesting definitions of what's going on in each of these places. How do you think that's going to change in the short, medium future?
I think if you look at Johor, Nick, I think, assuming there's no power constraints, I think we're going to continue to see a huge amount of development up there. I think the hyperscalers who haven't deployed yet are all certainly looking different stages of planning, but I think in 5 years' time, I think we'll see all of the kind of the usual suspects with sizable campuses or deployments, whether that be themselves or whether that be through colocation partners. I think we'll see AI factories, I think is the new term for what the is calling data centers housing AI workloads primarily. So I think we'll see these AI factories. Batam is a bit more difficult to predict because, as I mentioned, there are still a few uncertainties, and we haven't yet seen any of these huge announcements we haven't seen the huge announcements come to fruition yet, in terms of actually getting built and operated. But I think we will see a thriving data center kind of landscape down there. Maybe not. I don't think it's likely to match Johor, but I think we will see probably a couple of 100 megawatts down there serving Indonesian workloads, maybe some overspill from Singapore. So I think it will be 3 different markets, but each haven't found their own niche, and they haven't found their own way of interacting to the benefit of the others with each other.
Wayne, please, your view going forward into the future. What will be different in terms of Johor, in terms of Singapore, and in terms of Batam?
I will be looking more carefully into how the capacity that is coming up in Johor, which will hit the market in the next 3 to 5 years, when they will introduce into the market. So I think it is something that is unprecedented, because we are looking at upwards of close to 1 gigawatt of capacity coming into the market, and it will be interesting to see what impact it will have on Singapore's market as well as in the regions. because, one of the interesting facts is many of these capacity will be coming live almost at the same time. So, what will be the commercial and the overall availabilities situations when they come to the market, and how it will impact Singapore's market. So that is something that many people are discussing right now. This is something that ultimately it will also swing Singapore's market as well, because they are when that happens, both Singapore and Johor essentially. I would foresee eventually it will be an integrated market, and what happens in Johor will definitely have a big ripple effect into Singapore. It will be interesting to see what will happen then.
Wang, thank you. James, thank you very much also. It's been an interesting how to say what I'm looking for, a discussion that's made me think again about some of the things I assumed about these three markets. So in that sense, it's been very, very valuable indeed. So thank you to Weng Yu Wong, and to James Murphy for sharing your expertise and your insight with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. The pleasure is mine.
Yes, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Weng.
Okay, and next we have a short segment on W.Media's SIJORI Week, which will be delivered by Sam Narby, Account Manager for Southeast Asia at W.Media.
Happening on the week of July 13th to July 18th, the goal of SIJORI Week is to bring together a global audience of leaders in the digital infrastructure space, and will include networking parties and business meetings, thought leadership presentations from industry leaders in data center operations, end users, government, leaders in AI and technology innovation, and more. It will also include exhibitions and technology showcases, as well as participation from global leaders, businesses, and organizations interested in investing and learning more about the SIJORI region. Having a week of activities will allow attendees to customize their experience and decide which activities they'd like to get involved in. You can actually view the entire schedule at SIJORIweek.net. That's SIJORI, SIJORIweek.net. At the beginning of the week, we'll actually have two Interconnect World events. One will be in Johor and one will be in Batam. So Interconnect World will bring together 200 plus senior leaders. The event includes the entirety of the digital infrastructure ecosystem, including data center operators, telcos, connectivity players, investors, power, land, government, design and build, and more. Even though the event is invitation only, we are asking any interested sponsors, speakers, or attendees to reach out to us to see how to get involved. And leading up to the Interconnect World event in Batam, we'll actually have a golf tournament, which will be a lot of fun to get people together for some friendly competition. We'll additionally host an industry networking party, and then finally the Interconnect Forum itself, which will include networking and thought leadership presentations. We're also planning a site tour to Nong Sa Digital Park as well to learn more about the projects there. So that same week, the Interconnect Forum in Johor will include networking opportunities and thought leadership presentations, as well as a site tour to Nusa Jaya Tech Park. This event is supported by MDEC, which will help to ensure that we have key attendees from government and investment alongside the other VIP attendees as well. And finally, to finish the week off, we'll have our annual Singapore Cloud and Data Center Convention with an expected audience of 1,500 plus attendees, 40 exhibitors, and keynote presentations and panel discussions from industry leaders. This event will include global speakers and attendees, and it's already shaping up to be our biggest event yet in Singapore. So, to summarize, this July 13 to 18, if you're interested to meet senior leaders in digital infrastructure, or perhaps you yourself are a leader, and if you want to learn about all of the innovative technologies, partnerships, and developments in the SIJORI region, and if you want to have a lot of fun networking and learning, you can head over to our website, SIJORIweek.net, and look to get involved. But thank you all, and I hope to see you that week. Cheers.
Thank you very much for joining us. If anyone has any questions that are coming from the broadcast that you've just heard, please direct your questions to editor@W.Media. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon at a W.Media event in Southeast Asia or indeed across the whole of the Asia Pacific. Thank you again.